Dear students of class 8A and 8B, the following points mentioned in the board I am going to teach you. Number 1, General Service Enlistment Act 1856, Introduction of Modern Technology, Charter Act 1813, and Traditional Indian Society. So these are the four points mentioned in the board. I am going to teach you, I am going to explain you. The first point, General Service Enlistment Act. You know, the British introduced modern education among the Indians. The British introduced Western education among the Indians. And after having received Western education from the British, some Indians demanded employment in British administration. On the contrary, some educated Indians, some English educated Indians decided to join the movement started against the British because they favored agitation movement against the British because they belonged to rich family. That's why they didn't care for any job, but they took care the independence for our country. Since the country was under the British rule, and the British by occupying their colony in our country, India, ruling the country by adopting so many repressive policies, some educated Indians thought that working under British administration was nothing but working as slaves under the British masters, working as slaves under their British masters. That's why this group of people never thought of working under the British administration. Modern education was open to all, and modern education already it was open to all. Modern education, modern education made so many Indian people educated, and they were considered for low level of government jobs. Some group of people who belong to very poor category, poor family, they even demanded low level of jobs. But the spread of modern education forced the sense of unity across the country, and people were beginning to be inspired by the same ideas of liberty, equality, and democracy. That's why a group of people, they ignored the offer of employment under British government or British administration. And apart from this, keeping the interest of themselves, the British passed one law. This law is known as General Service Enlistment Act 1856. General Service Enlistment Act of 1856. Now, what is General Service Enlistment Act of 1856? Under the terms of this law or of this act, Indians who were working under British government were forced to go abroad by crossing Black Seas. But some of the Indians thought that crossing Black Sea was against their religion. Those who would cross the Black Sea, they would disregard the system of religion. That's why the British declared it mandatory for the service holders to go abroad through the sea route, to go abroad on behalf of the British by crossing the Black Sea. This act is known as General Service Enlistment Act, but it harmed the sentiments of Indian people. It harmed the sentiments of the Indian educated people. So they decided to organize movement against the British government. And some of them, they left their jobs and joined Indian national movement. Although at that time there was no movement, but it was going to be prepared. But still, they got themselves united against the British oppressive policy, against the British law, which harmed the sentiments of the Indian people. Then second one, introduction of modern technology. Introduction of modern technology. You know what is modern technology, and how did the British introduce it? The modern technology. What type of things the modern technology was? Modern technology means introduction of transport facilities, providing telegraph facilities, providing of railway facilities, and this type of things which are introduced by the British among the Indians aroused fear and suspicion among the Indians, that by installing poles from both the two sides of the road, the British would get the Indians hanged from the poles, where the telegraph poles were telegraph poles. The Britishers were making the telegraph poles and to supply the message through web. That telegraph pole, the Indian people thought that these poles the Britishers were using to get the Indian people hanged from there. That's why these kind of things aroused fear, suspicion among the Indian people. And next one, Charter Act of 1813. Charter Act of 1813 provided education compulsory in India. The Christian missionaries took initiative because they started establishing schools and colleges in order to provide modern education among the Indians. Even women also were allowed to be educated. But the British, decided to pass one act named Charter Act of 1813. Under the terms of the Charter Act of 1813, education was made compulsory. Education was declared compulsory in India. Christian missionaries forced the Indian people to be educated. That's why they established so many schools and colleges. They offered an Indian people who actually became educated, they were offered jobs in the British administration. This was resented by the orthodox section of society. They thought it to be an affront to their authority and influence. They did not want to be a part of it because, as I told you earlier, the orthodox Indian people, although they became educated, but they never joined the jobs under the British administration. Why? Because they thought that the British would forcefully Christianize them, and they would change their religious beliefs. That's why it should be better for them not to uh, receive the offer of jobs under the British administration. Orthodox Hindus regarded British social reforms such as the abolition of sati, such as the widow remarriage, infanticide, discouragement of child marriage. So these type of reforms, whatever the Britishers made, it went against the sentiments of the Indian people. Indirectly, it harmed the sentiments of Indian people. That's why the society and its tradition disliked the British policy, and they they boycotted the programs of the Britishers, and they boycotted the British jobs, and there were even more alarm when the women were allowed to be educated, because women remained there in their families, and women worked, had their domestic works looked by. For example, women were allowed to look after their children, to look after the household works, to look after their husbands. But whenever women came out of their families and received education, it resented Indian Orthodox people. They discouraged women uh, from receiving education. And next point, traditional Indian society. What is traditional Indian society, my dear students? The traditional Indian society was a society who uh, played a tremendous disparity in salaries drawn by the Indian and the British soldiers. There was a contrast between the British soldiers and Indian soldiers. So the traditional people of India, they made their own society and discussed this kind of discrimination and humiliation. They always criticized the British, and some of them they published some pamphlets, some handbills, and started criticizing the British oppression and discrimination, and and so one society also was made, the Indian named Traditional Indian Society. The Traditional Indian Society was formed in order to criticize the British and their policy, and apart from this, the Traditional Indian Society was started. It was started to begin the belief that the Western ways were a threat to traditional Indian society. Western education was a threat to traditional Indian society. That's why the traditional Indian society was formed in order to criticize the British policy of oppression, and the British also ensured distinguishing themselves from Indian and made laws that discriminated against Indians greatly. And most of the Indians, they realized that the British policy of oppression would not bring prosperity in the country, because it was done in order to safeguard British interests, not to safeguard the interest of the Indian people. That's why, as I told you earlier, a large group of Indian highly qualified people did not join British jobs, but they joined a group, Indian Traditional Society, and a group from where they decided to antagonize the British policy of repression, and supported the stand of those people who were working under the British government in a very low salary. And they decided to support their stand, they decided to encourage them, and some of them, in spite of being poor, they left British jobs and joined the Indian traditional society to criticize the British policy of repression. And next point, the same point I am going to discuss, the Indian traditional society. The centuries old caste system was threatened when the British brought in the concept of equality before law. In course of time, the British changed their policy. Due to constant criticism done by the Indian traditional society, the British changed their policies, and the centuries-old caste system was threatened when the British brought in the concept of equality before law. The British wanted to bring all Indian people under one umbrella. British decided to satisfy the need and expectations of the Indian people who received Western education. In order to draw their attention, the British decided to introduce the policy of neutrality. That means a policy they adapted. That policy that policy brought in the concept of equality before law in order to make the Indian people understand that what things the Britishers were going to make, not only for the interest of themselves but also for the interest of the Indian people, educated people, Indian uneducated people. That's why the concept of equality before law was introduced among them. So at the same time, the introduction of modern technology also brought the Indian people, also created an atmosphere. The Indian people misunderstood the British, as I taught you earlier, that the telegraph poles, railway lines, whenever these were started establishing, most of the Indian conservative people misunderstood the British. They thought that the Britishers were trying to make Indian people forcefully leave their religious concept, and they would be forced to accept the concept Christianity. So this kind of act of British policy aroused fear and suspicion among the Indians. Today, up to this, my dear students. Thank you.